All right, welcome back. Thanks for staying and joining us here in this session. I'm Michael Thomas, one of the co-chairs of the commission, joined by my colleague Sheridan Miller from Debbie. We're going to just say a few quick preparatory words, and then Sheridan will do the same, and then she will introduce our panelists who will capture this part of the program. We've had the experience in recent months of just coming up against this question of what are the economics of prison education programs? What are the resources that are available to participating institutions and to corrections? And what are the various costs and obligations and resource needs that they have? And so really the goal of this conversation is to try and answer that question. So basically we're clarifying the basic economics of prison education programs, thinking about the various variations in terms of the funding and resource models in our states, and thinking about how that may or may not change in the context of increased and restored Pell resources. And obviously, as part of our work with the commission, is this question of how can we help to advocate for the notion of resource adequacy. So again, fundamentally asking this question of what would resource adequacy look like from the standpoint of the various providers and stakeholders in our states, and how can the commission speak to that specifically and advocate for resource adequacy going forward. This is just a quick snapshot, thinking about it, particularly from the standpoint of higher ed institutions and from the standpoint of departments of corrections, sort of the essence again of sort of the resources that they have or may receive. Again, considering a fair amount of variation among states in terms of how these are composed and totaled up. And aggregated together. You see here sort of the summary of Pell Grant resources, as well as institutional grants and scholarships and other in-kind support by providing institutions. There is, of course, philanthropic support, both to institutions and to departments of corrections. Oftentimes, the possibility of state grant for need and merit-based aid, the possibility of state and federal grants. And in some states, we see, particularly outside of New England, also some state legislator appropriated FTE support to either the institution or to the Department of Corrections. Of course, on the right-hand side, you see sort of a summary of resource expenses and resource needs. Certainly, we want to talk about this as well, and in part, we'll be hearing that additionally from the standpoint of current students. What are the needs and resource needs that students experience in addition to providers on both institutional and the corrections side? This is a quick summary from somewhat recent research through the Alliance for Higher Education in Prison, sort of snapshotting the various sources of operating funds. You can see it sort of in descending order here. This is particularly manifesting the institution side. This is based on institution-focused surveying, but you can see sort of the hierarchy of current funding sources, ranging from, again, private foundation and philanthropic grants, college and university support, both actual and in-kind, federal grants and appropriations, and onward. And you can also see this from the standpoint of what are the various tuition sources that institutions get resources from. Obviously, institution-based scholarships, Pell Grant being certainly a very large source and presumably an increasing source, but a variety of different sources as well, from tuition subsidies to resources directly through corrections and or state funding. Again, we know this varies significantly from state to state, but again, a way of just framing what these various resource inflows are to the providing partners. With that, let me hand it to Sheridan and say a few more words and then introduce our panelists.
Thanks, Michael. Oh, yep.
Thanks.
Okay, so I just get back to slide here. So thank you, Michael. My name is Sheridan Miller. I am with NEVI, and I'm just here to talk a little bit about what state aid is available to incarcerated students in New England. This all comes from a recently updated report by the Bureau Institute of Justice. And the report outlines that 17 states place no restrictions precluding incarcerated students from applying to or accessing state financial aid. And in New Hampshire, in New England, we could see that those states include New Hampshire, as well as Connecticut, Maine, and Vermont. In Massachusetts, there have been guidelines that have been set by the Board of Education, Higher Education here, that do preclude incarcerated students from any of the state aid programs based on various things like what they were sentenced for, and things like that. In Rhode Island, there are still some policy barriers based on eligibility for federal financial aid, but I think there's some work being done there. So just to go into some considerations about that this panel will address, PEP provision costs consistently exceed program revenues, including Pell Grant funds. Higher education institutions can also only charge per regulation, tuition, and fees to incarcerated students, which can include both and flat fees. The new regulations that we heard about from Dr. Lloyd this morning will require PEP programs to be substantially similar to an on-campus program in nature and quality. Some higher education institution providers may not fully budget or account for full program provision costs, and accreditation typically requires program budget information related to new program types. So these are all things that are important to consider as we go into this conversation. I will finish up with some key questions about prison education program economics. These questions are: what are the economics of PEP provision in your state in terms of sources of support and related costs? How will Pell reinstatement impact those funds, economics? What resources will be needed to scale diverse, high-quality PEP offerings in the state? What would resource adequacy for higher education institutions and departments of correction look like, and how could it be achieved? How well do state appropriations and budget allocations reflect Department of Corrections PEP program support and provision costs? What can be learned from other states and their economic models? What key stakeholders need to understand and influence PEP economics and resource needs? So that's those are a lot of questions, and I will leave these with our wonderful panelists, who I will now introduce. So we are so lucky to be joined today by Dr. Ryan Thornell from the Maine Department of Corrections, Teresa Foley, Ruth Delaney, and Marvin Loiseau. I will give a brief bio for all of our participants, and then I will hand it right on over to them. So starting with Ruth Delaney. Ruth provides technical assistance to states seeking to implement new policies and practices and conducts research into justice policy trends. Currently, she manages bureaus assistance to colleges and correction agencies seeking to expand access to post-secondary education for currently and formerly incarcerated people. She has co-authored several reports at BURA, including Reimagining Prison, Incarceration's Front Door, the Misuse of Jails in America, and Price of Prison, What Incarceration Costs Taxpayers. Ruth holds a PhD in sociology from the Graduate Center of the City University in New York, from which she also earned a master's in women's studies. She earned a bachelor's of arts in English from Manhattanville College. And I am remiss to say that I did not introduce Tori Scott originally. Sorry. I also have a bio for you that is coming up, but we are also joined on Zoom by Tori Scott. Dr. Ryan Thornell currently serves as the Deputy Commissioner for the Maine Department of Corrections, appointed in April 2018. In this capacity, Dr. Thornell is responsible for the day-to-day management and operations of the department. This role also provides specific oversight of legislative and policy matters, medical and behavioral health services, correctional programming and treatment services, adult facility operations, and adult community corrections. Dr. Thornell's priority is enhancing the overall wellness of the correction system, emphasizing normalization, humanization, and modernization of the department staff, residents, and practices to produce positive, healthy, and sustainable outcomes. Beginning as a correctional officer in the South Dakota Department of Corrections, Dr. Thornell has served in the corrections field for 18 years, spanning multiple states, and has experience in adult and juvenile corrections. He received his master's degree in criminal justice from the University of Cincinnati and his doctorate in political science from the University of South Dakota. Marvin Loiseau. Dr. Marvin Loiseau began his tenure at the college Benjamin Franklin, in July 2011, and previously served as Dean of Recruitment. Before joining, he worked at Mount Ida College as Associate Dean of Undergraduate Admissions. He has higher education experience in undergraduate and graduate admissions, financial aid, and residence life through his roles at Mount Ida, Babson College, and Suffolk University. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Business Management from Mount Ida College, a master's degree in education from Suffolk University, and a doctorate in education from Northeastern University. Moving on to Teresa Foley. Teresa has worked in higher education as a faculty member and administrator in the Connecticut Community College system for many years. Teresa has worked as a faculty member with the Second Chance Pell program since 2016. Since 2021, she has worked with the SCP programs of the 5 Connecticut community colleges that offer programs in 9 Connecticut DOC facilities, which includes the only youth facility in Connecticut. In July 2023, the 12 community colleges in Connecticut will merge to form Connecticut State Community College, CState, with an aligned curriculum across 12 campuses. Teresa's current work is focused on expanding the SBC program and providing educational support services to formerly incarcerated individuals working on reentry to access the vocational and academic programming needed for gainful employment. And last but not least, we are joined on Zoom by Victoria Scott. Victoria, or Tori, is a student in the University of Maine system who has formed her interdisciplinary degree in soft infrastructural social engineering to create a holistic approach to the design of social systems. So again, we are so honored to be joined by everyone here today, and I will pass it on to you all.
So much, Sheridan. Hello. Thank you. Yeah, why don't you do that over? All right, hi everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me and this wonderful group of experts who will kind of help us explore this topic together. In my work at Vera, I've come up against these budgeting questions. We've worked with the Second Chance Pell Experimental Sites Initiative members, in which figuring out how to use a Pell Grant, what a Pell Grant does, all those sorts of questions are part of the work that we do, but there's still many areas of higher education administration and budgeting that I expect to be led by my wonderful colleagues here on during this discussion. But just to kind of start off, I know we're all coming in with really different levels of knowledge, potentially, or different areas of expertise into this conversation. And one thing that I find sometimes can get a little bit murky when we discuss these things is how exactly a Pell Grant works. And the main thing that I would like everyone to take away from this discussion is to remember that a Pell Grant is a need-based financial aid award from the federal government that goes to the student, that the student then uses to pay for their education. And sometimes when we're talking, especially about Second Chance Pell, we're talking about authorized institutions. I think the same thing will come up as we move into the new regulatory framework and we have prison education programs. Sometimes it gets meshed together as if the college is receiving Pell directly. And it's really the unit of aid is something that flows to the student. If they were available, if they had the educational marketplace available to them to select from, they could take that as a flexible word that travels with them wherever they would like to go. The school, as long as they're admitted to that school and it is authorized to use a Pell Grant. So I wanted to kind of make sure that we maintain that focus on the person, that the entity that receives this grant is the individual student. And there's an aspect, I think, of working in a prison setting that that suggests a certain kind of stewardship to the colleges that are going to be teaching in that environment, because there are limits on how much Pell any student is eligible for their entire lifetime of post-secondary studies. And those limits are that you get 6 years or 600% of your award. And that's about $6,800 a year, basically. So it's not limitless. There's an end date, there's a horizon to when this award is no longer available for the student. And you can use it only up to your first baccalaureate credential. So there's kind of this preciousness about this award and how far we can help students in prison go with it, especially knowing that their options of where they might be attending are limited. There aren't all of the colleges in the world available in these settings. There's a handful, 2 in one prison. And so thinking about how you would advise someone through that, knowing that limited funding for that person is a real element of this set of decisions that the student will need to make. What will they do in prison? What will they do when they go home? Is there enough Pell left for them to do a baccalaureate degree if that is something that is kind of on the agenda for that student who motivates it very much? And that should kind of like bring you into a real discussion about what should you be doing now? Because there is no limit on the number of associate degrees, certificates, or other baccalaureate credentials. It's just that first bachelor's degree that kind of like cuts off in future eligibility. So sometimes you have students, as we heard earlier, about students who stay in the adult basic education program because it's just a wonderful experience to spend time with educators and with other learning people who are invested in learning. And so sometimes we can see students who want to just stay with the college program because it's just such a great place to be, who might use up all of their Pell without getting to a bachelor's degree, and that might use up their goal. So I kind of wanted to frame that because sometimes this idea of like turning on Pell is so exciting. There's a sense that like, oh, we can do everything now. Everyone can be able to go to school and it's going to be wonderful. And that is true with some limitations. And we need to be careful about how we advise students on this limited and precious resource so they can meet their educational goals. So I wanted to share that. And then I wanted to get into this discussion. I have these wonderful experts with me to talk about different parts of how we understand the economics of this. I think is one phrasing that I heard, or how budgets work in this setting, or just how do these questions work of like, great, we want to run a prison education program. Now, what do we do? How do we pay for it? Because I think as much as we would not like higher education to be kind of part of our economy, it is a business, even if it's not profit or public, there are aspects of that kind of like play out here where you have to have a way of paying for the things that you're trying to get. For students to enroll in higher education in the United States, you typically have to pay for it. That's just an element of how higher education works here. But that remains true in the prison setting in many cases. And so I have all these great folks here with me to talk about all of the different ways that these budget questions kind of like play out in operating a program, both in a Pell context, not in a Pell context. And so I want to kind of just jump right into it. And so I'd like to turn to you first, Teresa. And I'm curious if you could walk us through from your position at Nantucket Community College and what you see across the Connecticut system, of what are kind of the biggest issues that you run into, or your second chance helpers run into in relation to funding or that kind of administrative angle?
From our perspective, our programs at the community colleges are accredited or they're accepted by NETG as alternative sites for our programs. And so the overall tent that we work in is that whatever services and resources we have on campus, we need to try to replicate that as much as possible in the facilities, so that the students have equal access. But within Second Chance Pell, we also have students cannot incur additional costs for their education. So when we look at kind of the economics of it, the Pell covers the tuition and fees and their books, which means that from our perspective, based on our tuition model, we have $130 per student for a 3-credit class that needs to cover books and supplies. So that is a challenge to some extent because of publishers and books are expensive. So we look for alternative books and things to that effect. But it is something, a reality that we deal with. In order to offer our classes and facilities, we need at least 13 students to break even. And that's just going to cover the cost of the instructor. That doesn't cover the cost of staff on campus to run the program. And so any overage in terms of whether it's books or student fees or things to that effect gets eaten by the college, essentially, because it can't go back to the student. And so there's a lot of what we call presidential waivers that occur in order to deal with the extra overage in terms of the economics. But it is successful in terms of when we running the classes and working with the instructors and the students They are very successful in their courses and their programs, and so we find that it's definite benefit for the students overall, and the college in and of itself. And so we will do that.
So I'm hearing a little bit about cost of attendance, which is a little bit different than kind of the tuition. The tuition fees are part of cost of attendance. And then you have these other elements which are considered eligible education expenses that someone might be able to use financial aid to pay for. So with students who are not incarcerated, sometimes what we see is that someone gets financial aid, covers tuition fees, as well as other eligible expenses, for example, books. So you might have a student that they pay their tuition fees out of their financial aid award, and then they receive some money back from the school. Sometimes you'll hear about this called Pell refund or credit balance. And then that student can go out and they can purchase the book using that money. It is not for any expenses if students eligible for education expenses. And so one of the things about the way Pell works and will work in the new regulatory framework is that colleges have to figure out a cost of attendance that is really limited to tuition fees. And there's options for the school to be able to adjust the fees. So these tend to be the thing that gets adjusted most, especially with a lot of state schools that can't easily change the tuition rates from one location to another location. So when you create this new prison location, you can say, okay, well, you know, the prison, we're not going to have anybody parking. So let's get rid of this parking fee. We're going to take that off the cost of attendance. And we aren't really considering at this moment doing a big student activity drive. So we're going to take the student activity off. So you can kind of take some things off. You can also turn around and add some things like books so that the students are essentially authorizing the college to purchase the books on their behalf. And the college is obligated to bring those books to the student. So that's one of those areas that is a little bit of a change in practice for colleges that are used to having kind of this cost of attendance that includes these eligible expenses that the student then can go out and buy those things on their own, where now the college is in the position of having to bring everything into the prison itself. And so I think I was hearing a little bit about that, Teresa, with this. You can only charge those things, and then that kind of lets them create some administrative challenges on your end to figure out like, how do I deliver that service? So what do I do?
And when we do go to the prisons to enroll students, because there is no technology in the facilities, everything is done by paper pencil. A FAFSA application to the college, and then it comes back to the college and has to be inputted in person with labor, basically, in these different offices, which causes an extra resource that needs to be invested into the program on the college perspective. Because at the college in and of itself, we expect students, and we're set up so that students come into the college, fill everything out electronically, and then it's taken care of in front. That's not the case with the second itself, because it's all paper pencil, it's labor intensive, and it takes staff to run that. So it is an extra cost. It's not a cost that is directly.
So I want to jump in now, Marvin, and you're coming from the perspective of college. It's not private education, but a private nonprofit college. And I was wondering if you could tell us about how your budget works as a private college, and how you might think about starting a new location. If you're thinking about this at any location, how would you approach that budget?
Yeah, so for us at Benjamin Franklin Cummings Institute of Technology here in Boston, we're a private low-cost college, and what I mean by low cost is that we're under $20,000 a year for a full-time student. So, but to break it down, we don't get state appropriation funds like the public institutions do. So every single dollar needs to be accounted for all of our expenses. So what we have to do is we have to figure out, okay, what does it cost to educate a student at Benjamin Franklin? So for Benjamin Franklin, it costs $22,000 to educate a student with all of our expenses. So our tuition is $19,000. We're already at a loss. So what we have to do is we require our development office to fundraise for that loss, in addition to fundraising for other opportunities like programs like this. So in order for us to make it happen, we have to really do a deep dive of where every single penny is going. Okay, so for each program, 30% of any tuition dollars goes to a program. 70% of the rest of the tuition dollars goes to administrative costs. So goes to the office of the president, the administrative offices, the financial aid office, the student services office, the student activities, all those different things. All of those costs, there's cost to all of that. You have to pay salaries, you have to pay benefits, you have to pay, for, operating expenses. So all of those dollars need to be accounted for. So for us, it's really understanding what what is it going to cost us to run any program. So we've had to be very creative. What we did was we partnered with an organization, we partnered with the Boston Pre-Release and said, your teacher will give you our curriculum and your teachers can teach that. We won't pay your teachers, but since you are paying your teachers, you teach our curriculum and we'll give you the credits for that. So that's how creative that we've been able to do so that there's no out-of-pocket expenses for us to be able to run programs where students are actually getting credits being taught by the instructors at the correctional facility and using our curriculum. So those are some of the things that we've had to be creative with. We don't have an endowment like MIT or Wesleyan University or any of those organizations. We just don't. So in order for us to be able to do what we want to do and be able to provide opportunities for students, especially in careers that are in high demand, all the programs that we do at Benjamin Franklin are all in high demand. So there are companies that are waiting for our students to graduate so that they can hire. Many of our students have more than one job offer. So we're not giving them enough employees for them to be able to be satisfied. So we have to, continuously produce. But in order for us to do that, people need to understand that there's opportunities beyond, the traditional programs that are out there. So we have to do a lot of educating about what does it mean? All of that costs, right? So you have to factor that in as well, because you have to spend money on marketing. So all of that has to factor into the budget, because nobody really knows that you can go and get a job as an optician. Corey Friendly. You can go to get a job as an automotive technician, Corey Friendly. An electrician, Corey Friendly. So HVAC technician, Corey Friendly. So we offer those programs that are really Corey friendly, but a lot of people don't realize those opportunities exist. So the marketing piece is another budget item that we have to add to the line item, right? And so all of that needs to factor in. So in order for us, so the Pell Grant is a great first step, but it doesn't even scratch the surface of meeting our budget needs as a private institution, as a private nonprofit institution. And so we're just trying to break even. Okay, we're not trying to make a surplus. We don't have an endowment. That doesn't exist for us. We're not a Harvard. But what we're trying to do, and the reason why we do exist, and we are designated as a minority serving institution. So the reason why we exist is because we are providing an opportunity for students to get a career that is supportive of returning citizens. So we want to make sure that we provide those access and those opportunities, and we have to be creative on how to do that.
Thank you. So it sounds a little bit like if someone came to you and they said, I want to start an education program, it sounds like you would have a conversation with them about it. This is what the budget looks like. This is how we would map this out. Am I understanding that right? Is that part of your job?
Yeah, and so what I do is I'm the one who organizes the MOU for all the organizations. And what I do is, obviously the first thing they say is we don't have any money. So I'm like, okay, so now let's figure out how we're going to make this work. And most of the times what we're doing is we have a great development office. And so I say to them, I said, we have a program here that we want to fund. And let's look for a foundation or organization that's going to fund this program. So I have to create a budget of how much all that will cost. I have to make sure that the Department of Correction is going to sign off on that, which is very difficult, by the way. because they can't sign off on anything without the state. And so, that takes time. And so, making sure that we can do that. And we can find the funding. And so as long as there is that collaboration, those opportunities, that could happen. But, there's always the roadblock of, okay, the Department of Correction doesn't want to find this, or this organization doesn't want to find this because they have to go through a vetting, procurement, there you go. A procurement process. So they can't just sign off documents like that. So it's a process, and we try to do the best that we can. We try to get as much funding as we can. The good part is that in order for us to make this happen, we have to have the president of the college and the board of trustees of the college in support of this effort. If I didn't have that, none of this would get done. So it's very important that the institutions committed to this, especially for a private nonprofit college like us, to be able to do that.
So it sounds like a little bit like one of the challenges of operating a college program in prison setting is that when a student pays their tuition to come to your campus, a lot of services are available on that campus. You don't have to engage in. You don't have to think about specific delivery to another. So they come and they work with your admissions folks that are there in the office. They work with your registrars there in the office. And all those things can happen there. But when you're talking about an additional location of the college, a satellite location of the college, that sort of turns the idea that you're going to be operating your college and move those together there. You have to think about how to bring in those other resources, because when the student pays tuition, they're entitled to those things. That's part of what they should be receiving. So that's what I'm hearing is a challenge to figure out the way you need to budget. I heard that a little bit from Teresa as well, as how do you transport all these things to the application. So, Brian, I'd love to bring you into this conversation about, you've heard a little bit about the colleges are kind of like bringing things from where they operate, taking them to this new environment that is where you specialize. And I was wondering if you could talk us through a little bit the kind of investment that your Department of Corrections made in supporting college programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm fascinated because I'm learning so much about higher education budgeting and financing that I never knew about. And I'll just start by saying we don't have a budget for higher education in the Department of Corrections. And one of the things Commissioner Liberty and I have learned very early on is that when you are alongside all of your state department colleagues at the appropriations line every year for the budgeting process, we typically are at the very end of that line. And so our mantra is low cost, no cost in everything we do. And we've been able to get by. But to your question and to your point, all of our facilities in Maine, all 6 of our facilities, both secure and pre-release settings, offer college education with our partner universities, currently all of which are second chance Pell funded locations. And that is excellent. But we have to provide the all other of college education beyond the classroom, beyond the virtual advising and those sorts of services that my colleagues here have all just described. And so that requires an investment by the department. And, when you ask what that looks like, it takes a whole host of different shapes, sizes, and amounts. I can talk through those, starting with physical space. It's been talked about several times here, but we have to ensure amongst all of the other competing priorities within our facilities that we have physical space to provide a learning environment. Our commitment is if we're going to provide something like college education or any of the other services we provide, we want to make sure we provide it in a very normalized manner so that it's less institutionalized and more reflective of what is possible out in our community. So if you're a college student, whether you're in prison or not, you should have access to a certain setting to learn it. That requires us to have, again, classroom space, which any of you who work in corrections know is at a premium. So it's required us to partner with different nonprofit agencies as well as philanthropic organizations to accept donations. We had a long-standing relationship with the Sunshine Lady Foundation, where we actually started our higher education program more than 10 years ago through donations from Doris Buffett and her organization. And as that relationship started winding down in the last few years, we were blessed to receive a large donation from the Sunshine Lady Foundation that retrofitted a higher education center in our main state prison. And so that gave us an additional 4 classrooms, completely outfitted with technology for college education. Without that donation, that would not have been possible in our largest facility because we don't have the budget for that. But that space is now available. And we've been able to do certain retrofitting at other sites in order to provide classroom environments. So that's a major investment that we've been required to make, and we've been able to problem solve. Another one is the staffing support that's necessary. Partnering with college organizations has been great, but actually delivering the preparatory services, the FAFSA applications, all of the paperwork, all of the schedule coordination that goes along with enrolling in college has largely had to be coordinated by our Department of Corrections staff. And so we've had to really have our facility education staff, some of which are in the room today, put on many different hats to go outside of their traditional skill sets in order to help with the college enrollment process and then the coordination of that. So it's required a pretty sizable investment from an FTE perspective. We have converted many other positions that we are no longer using the same way and created education specific positions strictly for this purpose. And then I think the other cost that I would mention is the technology cost, which is probably the most challenging cost, but also the most important from a sustainability perspective. Many of you have heard probably much more than you ever care to hear about, but we have a technology infrastructure now in all of our facilities that allow for internet access and wireless internet access for our college students, which we're very proud of. However, that would have never been possible if it weren't for 2 non-DOC, non-state general fund funding sources, one of which was what's called Network Main, which is the infrastructure network that connects all of our main state libraries together through internet services. And they provide internet service access to education entities across the state of Maine at no cost to the entity. So we were able to apply to Network Maine as an education entity, even though we were a Department of Corrections, and they granted us approval under their umbrella, and they have outfitted our facilities with the internet infrastructure and wireless technology. That just happened in the last 18 months. Without that, we would not have the ability to have that infrastructure in place or their support. And the second funding source came through, I don't recall the exact funding source, but it was COVID-19 related dollars that were able to be used in a way to sustain programs and service access in a safe pandemic related manner. It allowed for us to purchase the devices necessary for all of this. And so we made a very sizable investment across the next 5 years of funding eligibility to pay for the devices that we need currently, but also in an enrollment expansion timeline as well. And so that's how we've been able to cobble together all other funding that's necessary. And it's hard. I'm assuming many of the corrections departments that are here are going through similar challenges. And I think that's part of why this conversation is so important, because we all have our funding challenges and figuring out ways for that to be sustainable. And that's our biggest issue is, how do we go beyond year 3 or year 5 when we're cobbling together grant funding, Network Main funding, all these other groups of pots of money that all have a expiration date on them, different from our general fund budget that is able to be renewed every 2 years. And so that's really our challenge that we just keep getting along with. But at some point, there has to be a plan for sustainability across all of these things.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things that I was thinking about as you were sharing the space, the staffing, that all of those things kind of shape how many classes the college can run at a given time, how many students they can enroll, and even what times of the day they can operate. As well, what I've learned in my work over time is that while, prisons are 24/7 operating institutions, there really is kind of a first shift part of the day where a lot of things happen, and then other parts of the day it's a little bit of a lower staffing level, especially right now given the major crisis in staffing and corrections, but that it can be harder to run things kind of after hours, what might be considered after hours. Evening classes in particular are perpetually challenging in every environment. And part of that is that you need that staff person to kind of be in the education area, as part of their requirements as an agency usually, to have a corrections officer, whether they might be a volunteer or another, a certain number of people gathering. So like coming back to Teresa's earlier point of how many people to enroll, what's the business model, what that's called, 12 people per class, you have to get 12 people in the class or else the college is operating at a loss. Like all of these things then play out also based on what can the corrections department provide, based on their own staffing challenges, the number of classrooms they have available, the times of day. And then layering kind of contact hours on top of that is that you can't just have it, the college can't just have it for an hour, you need to have it for a designated amount of hours and you can grant it credit. So you can kind of see how all these things stack up. And then to kind of add one more complication on that, you're trying to make the Pell Award as efficient as possible. And for some colleges that will mean, if possible, if the students are ready for it, to try to enroll them in 12 to 15 credits. You know, a lot of research has shown for non-incarcerated students, we don't know exactly how this applies in the prison setting, but that getting to that 15 credits will move someone towards that credential. Obviously, they're going to accumulate credits quicker, but it also results in less time stopping, not dropping out. So moving people towards that credit accumulation can be really valuable to make that Pell Award for it's only 6 years or 600%, try to get to that bachelor's degree. But as we are hearing, you know, there's so many different factors and layers and filters that can layer on top of each other to make like getting to that thing quite challenging. And that all kind of then comes back to, well, what is our budget? How many students? How many credits? How are people moving along this pathway? So I'd love to get Tori involved. I think Tori or Victoria. So you had Tori on your name earlier. All right, so I'd love to hear from you, Victoria, from your perspective as a student, what investments in your education you saw from the institutions that you were working with that really mattered to you?
It's a lot shorter of a list of the investments that weren't made that didn't matter to me, honestly, is between the administration of the Department of Corrections and the administration and faculty of the University of Maine and Augusta through our PEP partnerships. I've had so many opportunities extended to me and so many people who wanted to further my own investment in my education. And I remember the first conversation that I actually had with Dr. Thornell when I was asking him about enrolling in college, and he was very interested about what my aspirations were. And I just asked him, you know, don't believe me, let me prove it. And he gave me that shot. And that was one of the most earth-shaking moments for me, was just having that opportunity to enroll and to be engaged and to be matriculated from the Women's Center, because we were a higher security facility. So it was kind of unprecedented at that point. And we started off with just kind of the bare basics, you know, supervised internet access and textbooks in my room. And then we kind of kept building on that as the semesters went along. And now it's spread, and so many people are becoming illuminated by the opportunity to reach for their potential and to find out exactly what they're capable of. And that's a very beautiful experience to witness. I think definitely the Wi-Fi being extended to our rooms so that emergencies don't interfere or anything like that. The controlled web access has really been crucial in the progress of all our students and in our student success stories. So that's been so important, but not only that, beyond that, the expansion of the secured wireless access has normalized the experience for us, being able to just kind of chill out in our room and get our homework done, do our studying, to be able to kind of just have that at our fingertips, being able to send a message to our professors when we don't understand something, or to explain a situation to them. And they have all been overwhelmingly compassionate about our circumstances and willing to work with us to find suitable alternatives. I think that that has been a really gratifying and a very humbling experience at the same time. And I feel very honored and blessed to have been at the forefront of this movement in the MDOC. Beyond that, I think that the professional development opportunities that I've had access to have really been life-changing for me, and not only have affected, my career trajectory in the future and the things that I can list on my resume now when I'm a returned citizen myself, but it's done a lot for my self-image as well, and done a lot to kind of alter that and show me in a positive light to myself. Recently, through our PEP Advisory Board, which is a partnership with the University of Maine at Augusta, I had the chance to write a grant for $100,000 to the Davis Foundation to help with reentry transition for academic continuity. And that was a phenomenal experience. I was taking a class concurrently with the university for grant writing in a global environment. So I got to practically apply those skills immediately. And to be able to successfully acquire that grant was like a dream, it was a dream come true. And that was really amazing. And it spoke to exactly what prison education can do when permissions are granted and when that's an investment that administrations want to make. Because now I know that as a returned citizen, I can be part of that synergy, right? And I have something to contribute. So in my professional career path after this, I can contribute to state deficits and budgets to be able to make sure that I'm perpetuating these programs that meant so much to me.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Please.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that stands out to me about your comments, which thank you so much for sharing, is really that there's kind of this other layer of investment, of kind of investing in you as a student, the belief that you will take this opportunity, that you will succeed in this opportunity, and that it's something that that will kind of the investment into you as a student, and the belief in your future of kind of what might come next for you. That's some of this might represent. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I'd love to open it up for comments or questions for our wonderful panelists to kind of parse through as best we can. I will open it with that prompt.
Hey, Victoria, it's Brandon. I just have a follow-up question for Victoria. So I actually, for those of you who don't know, also a formerly incarcerated student, PhD student at George Mason University, and I was able to get my master's degree while I was in the Maine Department of Corrections. And Victoria and I sit on like numerous committees and groups together. So I would just like Victoria to explain to everybody here the importance of system impacted student leadership partnering with decision makers at the university and at the VFC level to inform the decisions that are being made, because I think that's a big part of where we need to focus the conversations in the wider framework of what we're doing here with this commission. So just Victoria, from your perspective, can you tell everybody here a little bit more about all the other work that you do that you didn't speak about here, and why you think your voice matters so much in that work?
Hi, Brandon. Thank you so much for asking. Yes. It's hard to list all the things because I really just try to seize every opportunity I can. The experience of being incarcerated has made me very hungry, and it has made me want to use my voice, because that was an unfamiliar experience to me before that. But it's definitely important to centralize and to include the voices of incarcerated people in the decision-making process, because not only are we affected by these decisions, but we understand what these look like on the ground floor. We understand how to troubleshoot these issues and where we might hit snags or hiccups that were unexpected. And we understand where certain holes in communication might be from one strata to the next in the power hierarchy. So when decisions are being passed down, sometimes it's not always the smoothest rollout, but being able to be part of that process gives us agency, right? So that makes us more independent leaders. It helps develop that sense of leadership that can really help us to influence our community in a positive way, so that our peers can look to us and see what we're capable of, that we're listened to, that we have a seat at the table, and they can feel included and belong, and they can want to strive to attain better, right? So that's a very important aspect and element, but it also helps us to be able to improve upon the systems that we're a part of, instead of being sort of passive subjects to the system. So I think that being able to be included in collaborations is critical to success in any case, as far as all of these developments go in education, in career development, in reentry, all of it. And it's going to make us far more successful citizens on the outside because we're going to be used to having that ambitious drive to be a part of something and to show that citizenship behavior.
I'd love to make space for also any other folks that share this experience or like to speak coming from that perspective in this room. Still, you don't have to only use this opening, but I want to make sure that that's a welcome opening to hear from others as well.
Okay, that wouldn't be me, but, thank you again, Tori, for sharing what you did, and for the amazing things you're doing. And I would love to hear a little bit more about the professional development opportunities that you mentioned. Certainly the grant writing sounds like one of those, but if there are others, it would be interesting for us in Massachusetts and elsewhere to hear about those. And I wanted to also just throw back at Ruth or at any of you, how the Pell Grant works when people are either transferred out of the facility or mid-semester or end up in segregation that ends up being long-term. What's the administrative labor there? What happens? And many other questions like that. Okay, let's go to Victoria first.
All right, thank you so much for asking. I would love to share more. I always am very excited to talk about what we've been able to do through the DOC's belief in us. So that's a really wonderful thing. I'm about to serve, I think it's my 4th term as Lee Perlman's teaching assistant in the Inside Out MIT philosophy class. So that's really given me the opportunity to learn some organizational skills and some communication skills to be able to look over student draft papers and to make notes, to help Lee coordinate classes via Zoom with breakout rooms, and to be an on-site support for any of the inside students that are participating in this. Before we had our technology really down to a science here, then sometimes it took a bit of running around and getting creative, which was very helpful. And I coordinated with our department educational staff to be able to pull that off. And that was actually fairly successful considering the limitations that we were at. And most recently, there was a Brave Behind Bars course that taught women here to code websites. So we were doing website design and actually learning coding languages. And it's really a thing of beauty to be able to witness women who haven't really, touched technology for the better part of 20 years light up when they learn coding languages and when they realize that they can make a functional interactive website. And being able to do web design is a high wage, highly marketable skill right now, and it's highly in demand. So that's an important career skill to be able to develop from here. Ultimately, it would be really wonderful if we could look toward the future and start incorporating these lessons that we've learned in our educational journeys into the reentry process and be able to form partnerships with businesses in the community so that we can exercise these skills immediately, because that really solidifies that learning experience, right? Being able to go hands-on and also being able to offer that in a professional exchange with the community gives that experience. And it also gives a positive association to the community with us as workers and creates partnerships with local businesses so that they'll be more apt to hire returning citizens. I will pass it back to the board for the discussion about the Pell funding.
Thank you. I think, one of to remain on the professional development opportunities for a moment, I think that's also one of the angles to the importance of offering technology in a prison setting when you're offering also a bachelor's degree track, because a lot of the doors that opens in terms of professional opportunity might be what we would consider a white collar job. job where you typically are sitting at a desk and doing some kind of work, almost always on a computer at this point. So having had no access to recent technology innovations can be a real difficulty for someone coming into the workplace in the 21st century and needing to kind of learn all of those skills on the job. And it could be a barrier depending on the ability of the employer to invest in that worker to kind of get them to the place where they can perform on those sorts of applications in the way that the person application needs to. So that is kind of just another, I guess, pitch for another angle as to why technology is important. It's not just the delivery of education that gets modernized in that realm, it's also potentially helping someone prepare for an appropriate work opportunity for the credential that they've earned. Yes, can we just get your microphone so that Victoria can hear you? Thank you.
Okay, Victoria, so I was also incarcerated for the past 20 years. But Ryan mentioned earlier how the education department, especially for higher ed, usually has no budget. So we see that a lot of it comes from outside funding, especially from the institutions that are willing to come in and teach. So with Pell funding opening up, like, there's obviously going to be a grab from other institutions trying to get this funding so that they can bolster their numbers or whatever the case may be. So how do you scrutinize who you partner with and allow into these facilities in order to, without trying to just get the funding that you need and get the programming that you need, how do you avoid predatory institutions from coming in offering subpar education?
Well, I can speak to the new regulatory environment that we're headed into that stems from the reinstatement language. And there's a lot of concern about the issue that you're raising among the different groups that were involved in advocating for the policy to first come into existence. And then there was this process called negotiated rulemaking. I'm sure I missed a little bit of Amy White's remarks, but I'm sure she touched on this. But there were several work groups that kind of got together, looked at the language and said, how can we make this something that has steps? What will someone discuss the regulation language? And that process included stakeholders from this field, including from incarcerated students and advocates, to offer their perspective on this, among other issues of how can we make sure that the education that gets offered is what's called in the best interest of the student. And what they landed on were a couple of different things. One is that only institutions that are private nonprofit institutions or public higher education institutions will be eligible to teach in these settings. So that immediately removes for-profit institutions from the mix, which is not, I don't know where everybody falls on the existence of for-profit education. So I guess I won't editorialize on that further, but that was one protection that was put in to make sure that these grants are used well. There are also what are called the best interest of the student criteria for items that every college that teaches in prison setting going forward must show how they are going to do these things. I've been talking about these a lot recently, so hopefully I have them at my fingertips, but it's that the faculty you're sending are equivalent to the faculty you're teaching understanding. The credits that you're offering are equivalently transferable as the credits that you might offer in any other setting to another student. It's that the academic and career advising that's offered to incarcerated students is also called comparable. That's the word that gets used. And finally, that the college that's teaching in prison will not have any barriers for that student to be able to continue at any other location of that college once they are released. That is one that might require some institutions to change some of their admission practices. With the idea that a college should not only be investing in the students when they're incarcerated, they should be thinking about them as students that would be enrolling on campuses under any circumstances. So those are the four areas that colleges will be accountable for. They will have to apply to what's called an oversight entity within their state, which is the body, and I'm going to say very generally, it's weird language, but kind of the body that controls the corrections environment that they're trying to work in, because these regulations apply to juvenile settings, to jails, to any place that a person might be confined. So that could be the corrections department, could be the juvenile authority, it could be the sheriff. But so, in those settings, the oversight entity will have to look at the plan that the college is coming up with, and they will have to consult stakeholders about that plan, get feedback. And two of the most important stakeholder groups on that list are representatives of confined or incarcerated students, and the second group, organizations that represent confined or incarcerated people. That could be a reentry organization, an advocacy group, the formerly incarcerated college graduates network. We have ideas about how they might engage on this. The state higher education executive office in your state and your creditor. So all of these folks will have to be consulted by the oversight entity to say, what do you think about this application? So there are this is no regulation language is ever perfect in terms of figuring out how best can we kind of shape what decisions people are able to make, but offer autonomy because that's kind of appropriate to the setting. So you end up with these kind of like multiple ways of trying to ensure that the colleges that end up teaching in this environment are doing it in a way that will truly benefit the student. Always coming back to this idea that this is a really limited and precious opportunity to get access to this funding. And if it doesn't get used for its credential value, you can't get it back. And so you're kind of really sending that student back by offering something that is not as valuable as it could have been. So those are the regulations that are in place. We're in a moment where every state is currently trying to figure out how to do this all at the same time. This group of others be talking about this as well. We're all, those of us who are kind of looking at the national perspective, we're trying to kind of learn from all the different states as they kind of roll this out simultaneously. It's a challenging implementation moment. Those are the ways that the folks that put together the regulations and the policy thought to try to memorialize and protect against predatory institutions.
So can I just add? So a couple of things. One is you could put any kind of regulation that we want out there. There's always going to be a loophole for higher education to figure out. So at the end of the day, higher education is in a crisis. We need students. We need to get the colleges are seeing low enrollment. That's nationwide. They're doing all they can to get as many students and think outside the box to try and recruit students, okay? Not every organization is going to be a best fit for every student in the correctional facility. It is really up to the Department of Corrections to really vet the institutions that they are working with. And so the best way to do that is to look at the statistics. How many of the students at the institutions that they're looking to partner with have a success rate of the students who are formerly incarcerated? What is their success rate? Can they provide that information? Are they even gathering that information? Benjamin Franklin is doing that. We know how many of our students are doing well and are getting jobs, okay? And so it's comparable to our actual, overall traditional student population. So there is something good about what we're doing, but at the same time, we all need to figure out like what's the best avenue for the students to take. And there needs to be multiple organizations that are working with the Department of Corrections. It cannot be one. You can't have one organization because not every student is going to be the best fit for that organization. So you got to figure out what kind of career path that you want and and the Department of Corrections needs to spend the time looking at, what that organization can do. Everybody's all excited. Oh, I'm working with MIT. I'm working with Harvard. That's great. But a lot of those institutions may not even be a good fit for the students who are incarcerated. Okay. And so how do you work that out? What is the graduation rate of those students? How many of those students are passing successfully with a B or higher? How many of those students are actually learning something for the career path? And how are they going to use that and communicate that to get a career? So you really have to, there needs to be a collaborative effort in how we approach this. And it can't be just looking at, oh, I'm working at the Department of Corrections, because the Department of Corrections is going to loves having MIT. Everybody says that, it's impressive. Oh, we have MIT educating our students. That's great. but how is that working with the students? How is that fair with the students? And so we have a lot of these great stories, but we need to make sure how is that going to help the student in the future and how is it going to get them through it. So collecting data, looking at what's working, what's not working, assessments and evaluation, and that's how you see what's working, how the programs will be successful.
I think what that speaks to is trying to figure out in this challenging environment, as I think Ryan pointed out, this mixture of time, space, availability, how many different credential pathways can you offer? Because one of the hallmarks of higher education in the United States is choice. And we just don't have that much choice in this setting because of the way that space and time are constricted. And so I think what I'm hearing from you, Marvin, is also we want to have multiple options for people. For someone who has a short sentence, what can they do? For someone who has a longer sentence, bachelor's degree is actually the ideal thing because if ever you get a bachelor's degree, it's not in some kind of cutting edge technology credential that feeds you right into the workplace. Because if you get that and then you'll get out for 8 years or longer, that credential is probably not going to be as valuable in the workplace anymore. So you have to kind of layer on these questions about sentence where people fall in their term of incarceration to make the best use again of the window of opportunity. And I think there's roles for all different kinds of institutions to play, but looking at the whole state or in this room, maybe the whole nation, thinking about what those opportunities are and where they are best suited to. I think it's a little bit cheerful. But thank you. I can see we're done. We've gone past time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Victoria, for joining us. It was wonderful to have you.
Yes, thank you for having me. This was such a great conversation. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.